back to the 21 Convention 2017 of Orlando, Florida, 10-year anniversary special event. As I mentioned to you guys and told you very explicitly and clearly at the beginning of this event, and when you guys got your goodie bags and throughout the event, this convention has been dedicated specifically to Andrew the Private Man, Andrew Hansen. He was an alumni speaker of the 21 Convention 2016 down in Miami, Florida. He was also a confirmed speaker for this event before he died. I thought very much about trying to push this event up throughout the year to actually have him speak again before he died. But I talked to him about that and decided he knew better than I did, that was a bad idea. As it turned out, he did die sooner than we thought earlier in this year. I believe in March 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. He was the first speaker to ever take this stage and contribute to the platform and then die. When I started this when I was 17, those kind of thoughts would have never and did not occur to me. It did occur to me years ago that at some point of the dozens and now over 100 speakers we have, that eventually one of them, eventually all of them would die, of course. But having had it happen in our 10-year anniversary this year was pretty intense. On top of an already incredible year things have been changing at a pace that I don't even have words for, in a very positive way, of course. With that said, Andrew Hansen, Andrew the Private Man, was, before I even get into my own personal take on him, he was a red pill blogger and philosopher and author, for those of you who are not specifically aware of him. That is a big deal in itself, but that is an understatement. The red pill community is not that big as a branch of the manosphere. To lose a major author like Andrew and speaker is a huge fucking deal. This was a big loss for a community that really, really did not need that. And he is sorely missed, not just for his contributions and his theories and his thoughts, but his sense of life and who he was. He was a very positive person. He was very, very, I don't know if joyful is the word, but cheerful, even considering dealing with the red pill, which is not usually associated with being cheery. He was an incredible human being, top to bottom, an incredible man. Having made the red pill transition, or taking the red pill, very late in his life, I believe in his late 40s, about 47, 48, which is unusual. With that said, the last thing he ever said to me was at his girlfriend's house at the time of his death, where he ended up dying earlier this year, Tracy, who was at this event, and she spoke yesterday about Andrew as well. The last thing he ever said to me was, "Make sure I live forever." He said this not only to me, but I believe Rollo as well. And with me specifically, though, he meant video. The videos from the convention that we filmed of him, his presentation, which you see up here a picture of, as well as his interview with Socrates, as well as his contribution to the Q&A panel from last year at the convention in Miami. When I started this company, again, I could have never imagined that someone who was about to die would ask me very sincerely and very seriously to ensure he lives forever, using the platform I built and that he contributed to massively and positively. To say I was honored is an understatement. I was nearly in tears. I had to suck him back as hard as I could. I don't know if that was absolutely necessary, but I thought given how much of a badass this guy was, facing down death literally with one eye, staring death in the eye with one eye, remaining eye. He died of a rare form of eye cancer, for those of you who are unaware. Yeah, it was incredibly intense. And I did, that was in person down in Miami, Florida, or South Florida, earlier this year. He was very generous with his time. I got to visit him quite a lot, not just through the convention, which happened a few months before that, but I had various knee issues, medical issues with a doctor down there, so I got to see him pretty frequently. And I'm very annoying and very pestering. And he's angry. He was an old man that would say, he would play this old man character hanging out with them, like, "Get off my lawn," all this stupid shit. It was awesome. I love when he said that. And we had about 1 year I knew him, not even, I think. I got to call him a friend. And that was a very rapidly formed friendship, in part because I knew he was going to die. And I really, really put the effort in. And he reciprocated in kind. We had a lot of jokes. My favorite one was I'd always troll the shit out of him with gluten-free beer. I would try to bring it over, and he'd text me like, "No, don't fucking bring it over. I hate gluten-free beer." He said my one redeeming quality with alcohol is that I like whiskey, because again, he hated gluten-free beer. I do have to make one final comment before passing it on to those speakers here who knew him. I had my best friend. I watched him die of cancer as well. He died at 22 years old when I was 19. That was 2008, August 1st. He and Andrew are two men that I've seen die of cancer slowly like this, and it sucks really, really bad. I fully respected and understood Andrew's choices, that he did not pursue chemotherapy and all these different crazy therapies. Like, people would email him, like, start drinking, like, cannabis oil and stuff, like all this stuff. He was like, nope, piss off. The courage he had to remain psychologically intact, and I have no doubt this is terrifying beyond belief. I don't think he was absolutely fearless. It's that he continued his psychological framework, so to speak, for lack of a better word, all the way up to his death. He was not afraid to the point that he would surrender who he was or submit. And that was really, really badass. I'll never forget having lunch with him. There's a picture of us outside of the restaurant where he ended up buying it for me too. It was fucking awesome. It was really expensive too. Just staring at this guy across the table, having a normal conversation. He was totally engaged, and this guy was about to die. He was not unaware of this. He was totally aware of it, 100% aware of his own mortality. And yeah, just faced down death with one eye. I think it's very rare that men can do that, or it's unusual. And to see that live and in person was just like, holy shit. I love this guy. With all that said, Rollo?
If you have my third book, the foreword of that book and the dedication of Positive Masculinity, I dedicated that to Andrew's memory. All I can really do is just sort of give you the stories that I remember of him. I knew him a little bit longer than you. I can remember when I had made the move from Orlando, Florida, and I was moving back to Nevada, and I was really kind of rebuilding my life at that time. I was still in the process of writing the first book, and I hadn't quite finished it. I knew I was getting pretty close, but at the same time, I had a lot of stress in my life because I moved from one job into another job, and at the time, I felt like I was kind of making a move backwards, and I'm just basically zeroing my life out and then rebuilding myself at the same time. And I knew that there was some potential there, and I knew that there was that the first book was going to be something special. But this is a time before all of that, and I think it was like in July of 2013. And I was listening to a podcast, and I think it was just like Manosphere Podcast or Manosphere Radio or something like that. And it was him, and he was on there. And I'd, bumped into him a couple times just online in virtual, worlds. And I had a conversation with him back and forth. And this is the first time I think I had really experienced someone, who I only knew digitally in a personal way. And so I listened to him, and like I said, I was going through a bad time, but I listened to him on this radio or this podcast, and he just sounded so real and so authentic, and it wasn't just this sales pitch. I was really used to guys with blogs, and we didn't even really call it a red pill back then, but not as we know it now, but he was just so authentic, he was just so real, and I remember listening to his voice and just sort of, I tell this story in the foreword of the book, but it just kind of hit me that this guy was like the real deal, and it wasn't like a sales pitch, or it wasn't some pickup artist type, I'll be your friend if you pay me X amount of dollars kind of thing. And so I reached out to him, and after I'd listened to that, and I just bounced some ideas off of him, and he already knew who I was, and he was like happy that he was like, oh, I can't believe you called me, or you emailed me. So we had some personal emails going on back and forth for a while, and then he started calling me, and one of the few people that I almost instinctively trust with my personal phone number. And so I started talking to him, and every once in a while we would talk, and he would tell me what was going on. And in one of those conversations, he says, I could tell something was wrong with him. He says, I got cancer. And it was right before he got the eye patch, or had his eye removed. And he says, I think I'm going to lose my eye. And he was really upset about having, he was going to lose his eye. He was going to have to, kind of have that depth perception problem. And so we started talking about that, and I could tell it was really emotionally, bothering him at that time. But so, here I'm trying to be, Rollo Tomassi, and we're talking about red pill stuff, and then he just kind of gets real personal, and he gets real, like he's known me for forever. And I think if he had a talent, it's like, even if you just know him for a year, it feels like you've known the guy for a long time. A lot of people want to, I'm not going to get all, fortune cookie on you, but I think he was an old soul. And, going out as early as he did, it almost makes that seem a little bit more concrete. And so he tells me, I'm going to lose my eye, and here I'm trying to joke. I said, well, you're going to look cool because you're going to get to wear an eye patch, and legitimately, without having to make up some story about it. And so he was laughing, and we were just trying to cheer him up. And then he lost his eye, and then we thought it was in remission, and so we're talking back and forth. And I think there was at one point he asked me if I could front him some money for his cell phone because he wasn't able to make his cell phone bills. And so I gave him the money and like trying to just, okay, $800, no problem, you're good. And I just did it with just instinctively because the guy was just a cool guy. And I don't know, then it was just sort of an off and on thing that we had in between the time he lost his eye and then the time he died. And most of the time it was about our conversations were really about red pill stuff, but then we would start out that way, but then they get a lot deeper than that. And then that's why I wanted to dedicate the book to him, and I really wanted to have some sort of memorial, like you were saying, don't let my spirit die. Don't let me, I want to, make a mark on the world. And I quoted this before, but, Steve Jobs always said, I want to make a dent in the universe. And I really think that Andrew made a dent in the universe, in sort of an unorthodox way, but, just was, like I said, an old soul, and I think really a great soul. And so when he finally got back to me and says, yeah, the cancer's back, and he says, I don't think I'm going to fight it. And I was like, oh, God, it's just that pit, when somebody's going to go. And just like you were saying, I mean, the way we go out as men, the way that we die, is, I think, just as significant as how we live. So, I mean, that sounds real Braveheart and very, Hollywoody. And it's really easy to build ourselves up and like watch a movie and, watch, William Wallace, die at the end of freedom, that kind of stuff. Or, these really Hollywood romanticized endings to, great men. But I don't think what we really appreciate is staring death down in such a way and accepting it. And I think that the stages of death, when we're talking about the acceptance of grief and going through these different cycles, acceptance. And I think he didn't even have a problem with that. I think he just went straight from like, maybe he was a little bit angry, maybe he was a little bit sad, but he went straight to just accepting it. Says, this is the way it is. So I think if I remember him as one thing, I think he was very much a great soul, and I am honored to have known the guy.
Sock, before you take that, I just want to make it something I don't think I ever told Rollo, and I don't think anyone else. The singular primary reason I got Andrew to speak at the convention last year in Miami is because of Rollo linking his blog on the Rational Mail. Had I not seen that, I would have never found the private band. So it was all thanks to this guy.
Yeah, I think the other one thing I'd left out is I had asked him to actually write the foreword to the third book. And I asked him to do that, because I knew that if anybody could do that before they went out, he could do it. But it was just so aggressive and it took him so quick. So I ended up having to write, his own memorial. And if you have the third book, just understand that book is dedicated to him. And I wanted that to be his memorial, because if anybody believed in positive masculinity, it was Andrew.
I met Andrew on a blog. I'd been basically kind of scrolling through a couple things, and I didn't quite understand the technology. The digital age was fairly new. The method of communication I didn't quite get. Why would somebody throw shit up on a website and think people would actually go to it? And so it was kind of a realization that, the average man may have something to say. And that kind of changed the reality. And it was interesting kind of reading the content and the connection and the flair that he had. And then he did a really kind of odd thing. I knew he was in Florida. I knew I was in Florida. And I knew that he lived in a particular area in one town. And frequently I'd go back and forth between here and Miami, and I would pass by it. And you'd kind of relatively think somebody I know's in that town that I've never met. And I was always kind of fascinated by knowing people virtually. And at some point, he decided to host just a meetup. Nothing major, no fee, just, hey, let's meet in this kind of beachside town and share a beer, shoot some shit, and have a connection. And he literally sat down and he goes, I want to know my readers. And he goes, I want to meet the people who are reading this. And I was terribly moved by that. I thought it was rather remarkable. And so everyone's kind of posting in the comment sections that are going to show up, and next thing you know, people are coming in out of state. They're flying in. And I found that just incomprehensible that you would actually spend that amount of money, time, flying in a weekend just to meet somebody that you kind of had a friendship and a connection with virtually. And what you start realizing is that the virtual connections can be very much as real as the interpersonal. You don't have as much dialogue, but in many ways you have a capacity to think and comprehend and rerun those conversations explicitly by the written text. And so you go, and it was phenomenal to actually meet somebody, actually see somebody, actually be able to come in and say, my God, it was nice to meet you, and shake his hand, and to create and look the man in the eye in a way in which you couldn't before. I thought that was fantastic. What out came from that is that it wasn't a whole lot of people, but some of the friends or some of the people actually created strong friendships that then meet again on a regular basis because of it. So it had a domino effect, and it continued. And what you find out with Andrew is it's what you see here on the screen, even without the patch, is really what you got. You got an elderly gentleman that was wise, that had character, and he used to sit down and say that he brought out his inner pirate. The reality is that the pirate was there before the patch. Yeah. It really was, and you knew it. At when you find out that he's dying, and you knew it, and he goes, we're all gonna die. He goes, I'm just now on an accelerated schedule, and he was certain.
Inconvenient timeline.
Yeah, an inconvenient timeline. Yeah, an inconvenient timeline. He had wicked humor. I mean, just really wicked humor, and it was just kind of. It's going to sound really stupid when you have kind of a kindred spirit that way. You really don't have to say much. It's a privilege just to occupy space. Very much like right now with these gentlemen right here, and even with all the other speakers before, whether they're in the room or on stage with them, you're just kind of amazed that our lives were driven to the point that this actually occurred. And he had an absolute understanding of it. Something that a lot of people don't know, and it may be just because I'm kind of a geek this way myself, his actual education is on map history and understanding the historical nature of maps, not the boundaries based on rivers or anything else, but by population groups. How much area of influence did they have? And this sort of training and background and love of history and that particular methodology of communication visually kind of formulated a lot of his thinking. And we talked about feminism, we talked about culture and everything else as far as maps on, of ideas moving across, kind of plains and hills and stuff like that. And it was a terribly fascinating conversation. Having the fortune of actually meeting him before shooting the shit, it was a pleasure actually seeing a prepared presentation. And then it was doubly a pleasure to sit down and have the opportunity to interview him again afterwards, to kind of draw that information out. And my saddest moment wasn't the fact that I actually got to meet him and the loss, because in very much I'll never see him again. But I carry that spirit with me today. The first time I opened up my house to the under 21 convention, I had an opportunity. very much like this man here did. And I took and seized that opportunity to open my house, my life, in the same way he did virtually by having us all go down to where he lived, and actually see the town and the people he knew, and actually were able to meet and greet the people that he saw and wrote about on a regular basis at this little tiny bar. The other one was he held his own wake, a celebration of his life, to go explicitly to that and have the corpse come walking in with a damn grin, okay, was absolutely fantastic. And say again?
We got it on film.
Yeah, we got it on film. What you probably won't see are all the little fine details. I remember, him reaching around at his girlfriend's ass, all looking at him, and he's giving it a squeeze. Just that sort of pirate nature, that swagger, the confidence. He was not going to let his own wake get him down. And he goes, how many corpses actually have a chance to actually do this? The other part that I found just really almost kind of sad was that the bubbles of his life, the spheres of his life, came together for the first time. There were 3 distinct spheres. We knew that he had family, we knew he had friends, but in many cases, they never knew we existed. Okay? His own brother only realized that he had another complete different life, and then through himself had kind of understanding that. Did not understand a lot of this stuff that was taking place, even after the wake where we went out to, I want to say Buffalo Wild Wings, to have beers and drinks and continue on and trying to explain it. So it was really very, very touching that his girlfriend and partner would actually show up for this event, sit through the entire thing that she absolutely could see, and actually experience what Andrew experienced on a regular basis, to understand him, to share in that idea of that man.
If I could pause you for a second. The reason she's not here today on the 4th day, but was here on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, she's actually had another wake today in Miami. Another business partner's son just died. So we had her filmed yesterday, and that's actually specifically why she's not here right now, and the only reason.
So it was remarkable seeing how in another person, how this man touched another life, and it continued well beyond his death. And as you get to know her, you start to see the things that he fell in love with, that he appreciated. And it is very nice to be able to have that additional connection with her, his spirit, his ideas, and that you sit down and go, the man's gone, but his soul's still here and very much with us. And I'm not letting that go. I am just not letting that go.
Hell yeah.
All right, so when I first started reading Private Man, when you read his writing, you really recognize he has his own unique voice, and it's a very special voice, especially early on in the Red Pill. When I was getting into it, he was one of the first blogs I read, and I was drawn to it because he had such a joy coming out of him. Even though he was talking about these harsh realities, these Red Pill realities, he still made you feel like it was going to be okay in the long run. It's okay that you know the truth. You can still be a happy person. So I read him for a couple of years. We interacted online. And then on my road trip around the country in 2015, we were in touch, and I asked him to do an interview, and he invited me right to his home. This was in his little city by the sea in South Florida. I remember he took me inside his little modest home, and he introduced me to the ugliest fucking dog I've ever seen in my life. I swear to God, it's like seeing an ugly baby. You're just like, I can't believe this dog is so ugly. So the dog's name was Lucy. He's like, let's take Lucy for a walk. I'll show you what I do with Lucy. So he takes her out, puts her on a little leash, and he's taking her around the city by the sea. And as soon as we get to the first corner, 2 girls in bikinis come up and start petting the fucking dog. And they're like, this dog, what is it? We can't even tell what it is. He's like, I don't even know what it is. He's like, he really didn't. It was that much of an ugly mutt. And I was just like, this guy's awesome. So from those first few minutes of interacting with him, like I always call him like the uncle you wish you always had, because he really was that awesome uncle who has traveled the world, done crazy shit. He's done shit he promised that to make me never tell anybody. Like he's seen some stuff, he's done some stuff. So we ended up having a drink. We did the interview back at his place. We hung out a couple times in South Florida. We had a really good connection. And like I said, he's that kind of person, that old soul. You know, he's just there. He was a genuine person. When I heard about his death, I knew, of course, he was going to pass. But that day in March, when I heard about his death, it hurt. Like I woke up in the morning, I saw the notifications, and it it hit me hard. It was really like a relative had passed away, and it was just because the world really lost a great person. So if you go back to his blog and you read his stuff, it's so beautiful that his stuff is memorialized like that, because it's such a pillar, you know, especially because of that attitude. You see his face, like it's just, like I said, that uncle you never had. So that was, the last time I saw him was earlier this year when I came to visit some family in South Florida. And we made an agreement to get together. We're like, yeah, we'll just have lunch, an innocent lunch. So he ends up coming in an Uber, picks me up in an Uber, has this sneaky grin on his face. He's like, we're going to a strip club. And I'm like, fuck yeah. It's like 2 o'clock on a Sunday. We go to the strip club. He pulls out a wad of 20s. He's like, here you go, nephew, have fun. And I'm like, thank you, uncle. We arrived at the strip club at like 2:30. We were there until probably 7 p.m., drinking the whole time. We get in another Uber. We go back to another hotspot. Me and him, we had burgers, and then we just ran around. I introduced him as my uncle, and he's chatting up the girls. So much charisma, like unbelievable charisma. And then like I was sliding in, getting phone numbers everywhere, and he was that like cool uncle. And we had so much fun playing off that dynamic, like that little acting dynamic. He lasted, we kept drinking until about midnight. So from 2:30 p.m. till about midnight, and this is just a few months before this guy passed away of cancer. Like, so much respect for Andrew. Please go read his stuff, eat it up, and make it a part of you, because the joy that he had for life was just something so beautiful. He really is the uncle you wish you had.
Gentlemen, any last words?
He was a great soul. He was a great soul. You know how they have, I think in some religions they believe that there are Brahmin souls and there are, you know, castes and levels of souls. I believe that he was a great soul. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you for your attention.